So if I feel like I'm a healthy person, if I'm, I don't know, 15 to 50 and I'm relatively healthy, do I need to get a flu shot every year? I've heard varying things. So like if you get one every year, the antibodies continue to build up in your system. I've also, you also hear all the time, I don't want to get the flu shot because it will give me the flu.
Yes.
You just touched on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
So, should we all be getting the flu shot, or is it a totally up in the air thing?
Fantastic question. So certain vaccines are requirements for school, for example, measles, mumps, rubella. A lot of that is historical based on prior history of those infections with high lethality in the United States and worldwide. Flu vaccine is not one of those. So they are required, so to speak, within certain organizations, healthcare workers, simply because if I get the flu, and keep in mind that sometimes you are contagious for a day before you even show symptoms, it has advantages to protecting the public. In terms of should an individual get a flu shot, it's a personal decision. The recommendation is that it's not a requirement, but it's advisable to do so for a variety of reasons. If you're young and healthy, most people would probably not, but the advantages of being vaccinated is this concept of herd immunity. For the audience members who may not be familiar with that term, is the higher the number of individuals in a population have immunity, the less likely a foreign invader like influenza can take hold and create a brush fire amongst those people. So if all of us are vaccinated in this room and influenza comes in here, we will be less likely to develop active influenza. And then when we go home or go to the supermarket, we're less likely to transmit it. So the implications for vaccination are always individual decisions, individual recommendations, but then also public health ramifications. To give you the simplest answer, a young, healthy individual, the flu shot is about 60% effective. In those 65 and above, the flu shot is less effective. So when it comes to protecting grandpa or grandma or a relative who may be receiving chemo or an individual with diabetes. And so there's a number of things that we can talk about that predisposes to having a more serious illness than otherwise. There is a difference between a 20-year-old who's healthy and a 55-year-old who may have chronic lung disease, maybe a touch of diabetes, a little bit of kidney disease. So there's a bigger bang for the buck, so to speak, to vaccinate the most vulnerable. And then for younger individuals, it has the advantages for community reduction of the amount of influence in the community. So I generally, the short answer, it's recommended. When I was younger, I don't think I was somebody in whom I was vaccinating myself. I don't remember the exact year, but influenza was one of these vaccines where the American College of Immunization Practices were recommending it only in the most vulnerable. But when it became determined that the impact on the public at large can be improved by offering it to everybody, then you can actually reduce the total numbers of cases and deaths.
I think you hit on an interesting point, and that is, okay, if I'm 30-something and I'm healthy, maybe I don't need it, but maybe I should consider it from the standpoint of if my grandmother lives with me or lives in our home, so you have to consider other folks that you're living with or around that maybe don't have the same immunity that you may have.
Correct. And I think, that's sort of, that's a very public health conscious approach. It is that ripple effect. And so whenever I talk to individuals about the benefit, a lot of times it is about are you committed to the health of the community in addition to yourself? On an individual basis, it may not matter much on an individual basis. And that tends to be applicable to young, healthy individuals. But for individuals that are older or have what we call comorbidities, we've heard a lot about that with COVID, that if you have hypertension, heart disease, kidney disease, obesity, you're more likely to find yourself intubated in the ICU than if you don't have that. So reducing the total amount that's in there by having a population that's more vaccinated than not has those advantages. The other thing to keep in mind is that I think we talked about it earlier is suppose I get wild type influenza, meaning the real flu, out there, do you have the same immunity than if you got a vaccine? Theoretically, you may have better immunity than if you had the vaccine, because the vaccine every year changes, and it's based on the strain of the most predominant circulating strain that's in the world from the previous fall. And so sometimes it's hit or miss. And so the vaccine you are getting may hit the mark pretty well and offer a pretty darn good protection. And there are some years where it really missed it. And so the circulating strain is a mismatch between the type of vaccine that you're having. But because it changes year to year, it's this concept called antigenic drift. These viruses mix with other viruses that are within pigs or poultry or birds, and the genetic material allows for the surface proteins to change year to year, which makes it sort of a pain to keep on top of that, and that's why there needs to be a yearly flu shot. So for those of us that have had yearly flu shots, are we protected from future iterations of another version of the flu? To some extent, yes. But the same thing happens with COVID. You remember each shot was slightly different than the previous one to address the potential for the Omicron strain or the Delta strain or the newer strain. And that's intended to allow for the immune system to recognize, hey, this is a slightly different version. And that's why we're boosting the army of antibodies based on what's the most prevalent strain that's out there.
Hey folks, connecting with your benefits is our primary mission, and the SITREP is providing more options than ever.
Subscribe to our free email newsletter, subscribe to our audio podcast channel, or subscribe to our content on YouTube.
For details and links, check out the description below.